Yeah.
And then also the name. How did you come up with the name? Always like to know
The
that.
name has been really something I have thought about. I thought of more like a serious name, but we use the F word so often in our regular
Yeah.
life. I thought, why not give it a fancy twist?
Oh, I get that. Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah,
I
you
love
use the F word, but in a good way, in a
Creative.
constructive
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
So
That's
that's
awesome.
how.
Okay. I didn't realize that was like, it was like, oh, folks. That's awesome.
So yeah,
That's awesome.
But,
Okay.
So that's how the name came up. Very
Okay.
impromptu,
Yeah.
matter of few seconds, but it was like, yeah, maybe I can use that.
Right. Welcome to Media in the Mix, the only podcast produced and hosted by the School of Communication at American University. Join us as we create a safe space to explore topics and communication at the intersection of social justice, tech, innovation, and pop culture. All right, welcome back to Media in the Mix. I'm your host, Grace Ibrahim, and today we're joined by Shilpa Das Gupta, who is the host of the O Folk podcast, has worked at American University, works in the library, has done research here, has been a student here, and we're going to touch on all of that today. But Shilpa, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. This is amazing, and getting this kind of response from your own school feels great. So thank you.
So good to hear. We actually came across one of your stories AU did on you and the podcast. It was the OFOK podcast, and that's where we got introduced to you. And it's just so cool getting to learn about colleagues on campus kind of just doing the same thing you're doing, except we have two completely different topics that we discuss, which is why I'm so excited to talk to you about your topic today, which is basically like folklore and just old tales, which coming from a Middle Eastern culture, I have so many of those that I grew up with. So very excited to talk to you. But first, let's kind of start from the very beginning. Can you kind of just give us like a little outline about your time at AU, kind of from, being an employee to being a student to doing research, and then how you kind of got into this podcasting world?
Sure. I started in February 2017, initially as a part-time employee with the audiovisual department. And then that same year in fall, I joined SOC to do my second master's degree in strategic communication.
Wow.
I completed it. I was still working as a part-time employee. I graduated, and then I was still working here, as well as I was doing a full-time job with the Discovery Networks. In November 2021, I got a call. I got offered this current position of mine, and here I am.
That's amazing. And second master's degree, what was your first master's degree?
I did my first master's degree in US from Florida State University.
Oh, very cool.
It was an MS in Media and Communication Studies, Digital Media Studies, actually.
Yeah.
And then I was working, and I thought I will concentrate more on strategic communication, more like intercultural communication.
Love that, yeah.
And that's how I landed here.
That's so great. And can you tell us like about your time at doing the StratCom program? Was there like a favorite class, memory, professor, or anything you can kind of shed light to that?
Oh my gosh, there are so many great memories. Since I spoke about intercultural, of course, tops my list of great memories is the intercultural class, communication class with Professor Doshi, Priya Doshi. Oh my gosh, I loved every bit of it, doing the country profiles and those great case studies. It was amazing. Another class I absolutely loved was the research class with Professor Molly O'Rourke. We had a very small team, but we had such great, profound discussions in the class that I still remember them vividly. And they were something I used to look forward to. So that's something which I remember very fondly. And then my capstone with Professor Graff.
Okay.
It was a very sensitive topic, but his subtle sense of humor, probably you know what I mean, kept me sane and kept me sailing through my capstone.
Yeah.
So those are great days.
Wow. And so can you just tell everyone your background prior to like coming to American University? I know we were talking a little bit offline, but you came from a radio background, a TV production background. Did that happen prior to coming back for the StratCom? Was that something that you were like, oh, I enjoyed this, but I also want to expand my skills in communication? Can you just talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so before coming to the US, I was a full-fledged communication and media professional back in India. I have worked there for quite quite many years. I started my full-time career as a radio professional. I was a primetime producer and radio jockey. And then I joined TV, I did production. And then I decided to take a pause and concentrate or study or educate myself more on communication research, because that has always been something I have wanted to study. But in India, you have media programs, but not really communication research programs, at least not at that time. Probably now you have more options. So I decided to take a pause and come to US and do my higher education in communication research.
That's amazing. Good for you. I feel like that's covering so many bases of the comms and media world. That's very unique. And can you give us just a little bit of background too, when you were a research assistant, kind of what type of research you did and how did you come across that opportunity? Was that through your classes? Was that through like an assistantship program?
Yeah, it was through assistantship. So
Gotcha.
as international student, you are allowed to work certain hours.
Yeah.
And of course, that has to be within the department. So that's how this research assistantship with Professor Menchin Trevino came my way. And it was a very, very intense experience in terms of learning. I really wanted something like that, because that was when I learned the nuances of qualitative and quantitative research, which eventually helped me doing my capstone and furthermore into whatever I do actually, even for my podcast, because my podcast includes a lot of research. And those learnings have stayed with me. The areas have changed, of course, they do. But, you know, the core learnings never change. You can always fall back on those no matter what you do.
Absolutely.
And I picked up those things during my time at AUSOC and even before when I was, doing my first master's in FSU. So both are communication research programs.
Wow.
So I picked up bits and pieces from both my courses.
Wow. Shilpa, you're so decorated. Good for you. Very impressive resume. That's amazing. And then I kind of just want to go on a little bit of a tangent here because I think this is the first time I'm actually sitting with another past international student. I was an international student as well. Can you speak to, I have two questions.
Yeah.
Number one, advice to what students can look for on campus, because I know we don't always have the same opportunities as other people when it comes to work, things that we can do with professors, etc. But then also, can you just kind of give any advice, words of encouragement that it's not completely impossible and that, the path can exist. It's just maybe finding the right places to look or something like that. Any advice there?
Yeah, I don't know if I should call it advice, but I just, want to be that person telling that everything will be fine.
Yes.
It looks crazy when you first step. I remember when I came to this country, for me, going to Mars and coming to US was the same thing because I didn't know anybody here. And maybe if I would have traveled to Mars, it would have been the same thing. I started from zero.
Yeah.
And especially for, mid-level professionals like me, leaving a full-time job where you are earning well, where you are doing well for yourself, leaving everything and coming back to student life is very, very challenging. Emotionally and on a cerebral level. And many people do that when they come to this country. So for them and for international students otherwise, I just want to say hang in there.
Yeah.
It's difficult. It's extremely challenging.
Yeah.
You will feel lonely, but you will get through this. So,
that's a very. I feel like that is advice. It's good. It's a good wisdom there, and it's very true. This too shall pass. These times will pass, and you could surprise yourself. So, hang in there is definitely.
Yeah, you land somewhere, someday, somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. And then on the topic of research, basically, is there any lessons that you kind of took away from your research that you did at American, anything that stays with you today, anything you learned skills wise that kind of you apply to your day-to-day today?
Absolutely. Oh my gosh, there's so many things, but I will say some of the core thoughts that I had from learning everything about communication research is that no matter what your research is and how difficult it is, the more lucidly you can present it to the larger audience, larger listeners or audience, whatever you say, readers, better it is. Because the core idea of good research is how well it serves the community,
Yeah.
how well it serves the people. And the more people understands it, more people imbibe it in their life in some way or the other,
Yeah.
the better the effectiveness of research lies there.
Okay.
And I learned that you can do that very effectively using content, great content, because content is the king, we all know.
Yeah.
And content can be really easy. It can be very, very easy to look, but still you can impart very intense knowledge through them. It doesn't have to be very heavy with
Yeah.
difficult language. It can be easy, but it can be still very, very effective.
Yeah.
So I think those learnings, and it's not like I learned it from one area or
Yeah.
something. It's like from my overall experience. I still use it because when today I do my podcast or I do anything, I write something, I always try to keep it as simple as possible because I just don't believe in
Yeah.
using difficult, flowery language.
Right.
So, yeah,
That's
probably
really
that'll be
cool.
the most important thing I have learned.
That's so fascinating. And that reminds me of another episode we did where we were talking about how sometimes the field of science communications gets so complicated that it's nice to have visuals. It's nice to have this language that can connect with a wider
Right.
audience than
Right.
maybe those people that the small percentage that would know the big word or such. It's
Exactly.
nice to reach a whole nother group of people that might not have been interested in that type
Yeah,
of content. So
yeah.
that's so cool that you bring that up. I love that. And I want to dive into your podcast now because we are podcasting. So, Folk, I want to talk about all the little details first. So, can you just kind of tell us, I know during the article, I don't want to give too much away, but it kind of happened during the pandemic. Was
Yep.
there a certain, catalyst that kind of happened? Was there something that happened that kind of launched you into this, or was it just a natural progression?
Yeah.
And then also the name. How did you come up with the name? Always like to know
The
that.
name has been really something I have thought about. I thought of more like a serious name, but we use the F word so often in our regular
Yeah.
life. I thought, why not give it a fancy twist?
Oh, I get that. Oh, that's so cool.
yeah,
I
you
love that.
use the F word, but in a good way, in a
Creative.
constructive
Yeah,
way.
yeah.
So
That's
that's
awesome. Okay. I didn't realize that was it was like, oh, folk. That's awesome.
So yeah,
That's awesome.
But-
Okay.
So that's how the name came up. Very
Okay.
impromptu,
Yeah.
matter of few seconds, but it was like, yeah, maybe I can use that.
Right.
And it's easy to connect. Like,
Yeah.
people say that, the F word all the time.
Yeah.
But say it my way now.
That's so funny. I love that actually. That's awesome. Clever.
But,
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, speaking of pandemic, when I left radio, a part of me felt extremely sad because
Yeah.
I love radio.
Yeah.
I call it my first love.
Oh.
And
Yeah.
it was so personal that when I left, I promised myself that I'll come back to it in some way.
Yeah.
And then life happened. I came to this country. There was no scope for me to go back to radio professionally for
Okay.
multiple reasons. But then I thought that why not doing a audio podcast?
Yeah.
Because that's the best and the most close,
Yeah.
the closest I can reach.
And I know it's so easy to talk about the good moments and the exciting moments and the successes and all of that, but can you speak on some of the challenges and obstacles and maybe some fears you had launching this podcast, especially when it's something that's all you? If there's this higher stake, higher pressures, and then how anything you want to say to AU students, because I know a lot of people nowadays want to start their own podcast. So any just insight there on how to overcome those obstacles?
Sure. So when I started, I think my biggest fear was, will I be able to manage so many things? And I know many people have that fear because people are not doing just one thing. They have so many things. Because as I said, I had 2 jobs, a family, and then I was starting this new thing. So I was like, is this the right thing I'm doing? But somewhere it felt right because I was so passionate about this project. So you will always have that. I think to prospective podcasters, that's what I want to say. You will have problems. You will have life going on.
Yeah.
But just take that leap of faith. Just give it and then just see how it goes. And if you say that how I overcame it, I think a little bit of organization, a little bit of planning helps a long way. And that's also actually something I learned during my research days, to have a methodical research process, like the overall process. Just have a little time, spend some time on that, and rest of the things kind of, falls in place. So if you have too many things going on like I did, planning a little bit ahead of time really helped me a lot, because although
Hmm.
my first episode went on air in August
Wow.
2021, I started
Right.
planning for it probably from February or March, because the
Hmm.
research took a long time. I wanted to have some kind of banking of episodes and all of that. So yeah, that will be my advice.
That's great. Good for you. And I imagine going from working for a place like Discovery, where you're working with a huge team, and then all of a sudden you're doing this podcast where a lot of production is on your own, and it's
Yeah.
like a smaller team, and it's
Yeah.
yeah, it's a different world. It's a different world. That's amazing. And so a lot of these stories slash your storytelling, you're bringing stories that almost sometimes get lost in history,
Mm-hmm.
or we're kind of like resurrecting these tales. I know with me, it's my mom used to always tell me about 1001 Nights,
Oh
which
my
is the
gosh,
Arabian,
yes.
the original Arabian Nights. I like to
Yes,
say.
yes.
Why is that important to you, and why do you feel like other people are going to resonate with that too? I have to mention that Shilpa is in the top 50 of folklore podcasts, by the way, in like
Thank
all
you.
of podcasting. So that's very, very impressive. So I guess the question is, why do you think that resonated with people, and what do you think the magic is in
Yeah,
that those
I think I
folklores?
connect with you in this so much, because growing up in India, folk tales have always been part of my life
Yeah.
in some way or the other.
Hmm.
Uh, we- uh, you hear stories from grandparents, and then probably you'll hear this from many people coming from the South Asian belt, that we had long nights of power cuts.
Yeah.
And those were the nights when children used to flock together and
Yeah.
listen to stories from grandparents.
Yeah.
That was a very common thing to do.
Yeah.
And we didn't have so many entertainment routes at
Yeah.
that point. On TV, you don't have so many channels. You see what they are showing you,
Right.
basically.
Right.
And even there, folk tales used to be a huge part of entertainment,
Yeah.
especially mythological stories.
Yes.
So I've grown up on that. It has been
Yeah.
all my childhood. And then reading was a part of my childhood as well. So
Yeah.
reading stories, listening to
Wow.
them,
Yeah.
stories were everywhere around me.
Hmm.
And growing up, I realized folk tales are not just tales.
Yeah.
They have strong undertones of culture,
Yes.
of the locality from where these tales are evolving. And that fascinated me even more. So when I'm reading a story, I'm not just reading that particular story.
Yeah.
I'm learning about a culture. I'm learning about people of that area.
That's awesome. Yeah.
So it's a lot of things going on within that small story.
Yeah.
So yes, I have grown up on the traditional ones like Arabian Nights, as you mentioned, Aesop's Fables, but also many local ones,
Yes.
ones that nobody knows outside my locality, you know.
That's awesome.
Many
Yeah.
of them I have forgotten myself.
Yeah.
But what stayed with me was the fact that these are small stories popping up from communities of people, and they have no records today.
Yeah.
Because that was oral storytelling tradition. People pass on generation after generation, and after a point, they just vanish. So all these coming together, and my love for radio kind
Yeah.
of brought
That's
this
awesome.
thing together.
That's awesome. And can you give us like a little insight into kind of the skeleton of one of your episodes? So if you find the story, you find the folk tale, whatever it may be, and then from there, do you go into like a research process, and how do you kind of outline the episode, and then what does the
Yeah.
episode end up looking like?
Yeah, so the first thing that I do is search for the story. That becomes challenging because, as you already know, I don't pick the common ones. You will never hear a Cinderella story in my episodes,
Right.
because everybody knows it.
Right.
So picking the story is the first step.
Yeah.
After that's finalized, I kind of back calculate and kind of take steps backwards rather
Okay.
than going forward. So I back calculate what the culture is, where it is coming from, and do my research on those elements. Now, in that process, of course, I rely a lot on online research, because I have a job. I can't, physically go to places much. But I also rely on talking to people. So I find out information. Many times it has happened that I haven't found the information online. That's when I've, tried to talk to people through online communities of storytellers,
Wow, that's awesome.
online communities of folk tales.
Yeah.
Then people coming from those areas. So I spoke to, hey, do you know somebody coming from, say, some part of
Yeah.
India? Can you connect me? word of mouth, talking to people have helped me a lot through understanding of a culture. And yeah, so a typical episode will be like I start off with some hook element. It can be a little piece of music from that area, a story or a poem about that area. And then I move on to talk about the folktale itself
Yeah.
and the culture about where the folktale is coming from.
Okay.
I tell a little bit about the country because if it's a country lesser known like Brunei,
Yeah.
not many people know about these countries in at least this part of the world.
Right.
So I highlight about that, the geographic location and all that. And then I cover a little bit of the culture stories. Then I go into the folktale itself. And I try to connect the folktale with how it's relevant in today's time. And that's kind of how I sort of wrap on those notes.
That's so cool. That's so
Thank you.
cool. I
Thank
love
you.
that. I love that. And so like just educational, I feel like, because you just start learning about things you never really would go out of your way to learn about. I guess the best way to put them, like not everyone's
Yeah.
going to think about folklore and tales of time. Of all of the things you've done, is there a certain project or career path you've decided to take or experience that you've had that you're most proud of? One
It's
that sticks out too,
hard.
maybe.
It's hard. There are few, of course. But rather than picking one or two such events, I would say the journey so far has been really, really
It's a great answer.
joyful.
Mhm.
I would say it hasn't been easy, especially coming from country like India and being a girl. It's tough, and society makes it tough. And for me, I lost my father at a very young age in
sorry
an
to hear that.
accident. Growing up was difficult, and then eventually, when I grew up, there were expectations
Right.
people expect you to follow. Breaking those and coming to wherever I have arrived until
Mhm.
now has been a challenge. It has been heck of a ride, but it's a ride worth riding.
Worth writing. Yeah. Yeah.
So rather than picking one or two incidents,
Yeah.
I would say that every time I am faltering, I'm in doubt, I try to think about everything that has happened in my life so far.
Yeah.
And yeah, I keep going.
That's amazing. Good. That's amazing. Good for you. And I relate to that one on such a personal note of just
Exactly.
like breaking barriers and kind of, changing the game in your
Right.
generation versus maybe the generations that were before you.
Right.
That's awesome. Good for you. And then I guess basically in this whole universe of intercultural communications and the podcast and the research you've done, what do you feel like is the most fulfilling part, being part of all of that?
Oh my gosh, I think it'll be just working and meeting people from across the globe.
Yeah.
It gives me so much joy and happiness. And you learn so much, and that learning is not like you have to go to a school and do a degree, but you
Right.
learn so organically every day of your life.
Yeah.
And then after many years, if you pause and look back, you're like, I'm a different person.
Yeah.
And for good.
Yeah.
And that is the most fascinating part in everything. So it's important. I think everybody should have some experiences like this because it enriches you, it evolves you
Yeah.
as a person.
Absolutely. And then last question, just in terms of O Folk, is there, and now when I say that title, I just laughed to myself.
Now you know.
I love it. Is there any like plans for growth, or is there a place you want to see it at, anything you want to see it become? Basically, what's next there? Anything?
Yeah, so I have a longer vision, but then I also break it down into small little milestones.
Yeah.
So one such idea that I really want to fulfill for my podcast is I want to cover at least one story from every nation of the world.
Oh, that's
So that'll
cool.
be roughly 195 stories.
Yeah.
I haven't done too many because I have
Awesome.
covered like one country multiple times through
Okay.
different stories.
Mhm.
So that's probably I have covered 13 or 14 countries so
Wow.
far. So I have a long way to
Yeah,
go.
but still moving up on that list. That's awesome.
Yeah, so that's the smaller goal, but the longer vision or the long-term vision that I have is I really hope if in any way possible I can take my podcast and make it part of learning curriculum in,
Wow.
economically
Yeah.
backward countries, because I know their education thrives on such scarce resources. So if this podcast becomes part of learning for young or adult learning,
Yeah.
that doesn't matter, but at least through this podcast, if people can learn more about the world,
Okay.
I think that's where it'll be the most fulfilling
Yeah,
journey for me.
100%.
And I'm not saying this is going to happen in 1 year. I don't envision that, but maybe down 6-10 years,
Yeah.
if I can possibly make this happen, I
Yeah.
think I'll be the happiest.
That's amazing. I love that. And fingers crossed that does happen. I feel like we are organically just saying people start to learn things, and it's like it's
Yeah.
organic education. It's like
Yeah.
that's like the best way to describe it.
Exactly.
That's
yeah,
awesome.
It's like you're listening to stories.
Yeah.
It's not like a pressure of doing an assignment or
Yeah.
something. But still you are learning about these
Absolutely.
countries, and which is going to, I think,
Yeah.
help whoever is learning
Yeah.
a lot going
Yeah.
forward in life.
100%. I know. I did a whole film masters, but then whenever I listen to like film podcasts or directors or screenwriters, I'm like,
Yeah.
this doesn't feel like work. It's nice.
Exactly.
It's a nice
Exactly.
outlet to do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So, Shilpa, it was such an honor and a delight to speak to you today. Thank you so much. I'm glad us and the team finally met you. I feel like a lot of collaborations to come, hopefully. And thank you so much for being here.
Oh my gosh, I can't even thank you and the team, everybody who can't see on the camera. These guys are amazing. They're doing a great job. So happy. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. And this episode will be coming out early March, so you can expect it then. We are a bi-weekly podcast. We are every other Wednesday. So look for us then. And if you'd like to donate to the School of Communication, go to giving.american.edu. And that's a wrap.